It began, as such things do, with blood and whispers. Bois Noirs, Black Woods, was a forgotten village tucked deep in the French countryside, far from the reach of modernity or reason. Its 94 souls clung to the crumbling relics of time, stone cottages, overgrown chapels, and roads that turned to shadow beneath ancient oaks. When the killings began, even the wind seemed to carry an unholy howl. 13 dead. Throats torn out. Limbs shredded as though by claws. And the villagers spoke only of it. Le loup-garou, the wolf thing of old French nightmares. When the call reached me in Paris, the details alone turned my stomach. The prefect, a man whose voice shook as though he'd seen the devil himself, begged for my aid. Graves, he pleaded over the crackling line, Bois Noirs is cursed. You understand curses? Yes, I did. Too well. The train ride south was uneventful, though I read every scrap of paper I could find on the killings. Reports claimed the murders always happened under the crimson glow of a blood moon, a rare celestial anomaly. There had been howls in the forest that night, howls that froze blood and snapped sanity. Witnesses spoke of something massive, bipedal, with eyes that gleamed like coals and fur black as sin. Wolves do not stand on two legs. Nor do they rip a man apart and vanish without a trace. By the time I arrived, Bois Noirs was a ghost town. Doors were barred, windows shuttered. The people who dared walk its streets moved quickly, heads bowed as though the sky itself might punish them. My boots echoed unnaturally as I entered the tavern, if one could call such a grim establishment that. Monsieur Graves. A man in clerical robes rose from the shadows, a priest, pale and trembling. Father Thierry, he said, clasping my hand as though I might pull him back from damnation. Thank you for coming. Show me where it began. He took me to the Bois Noirs itself, the forest that lent the village its name. Night was falling fast, and the woods seemed to breathe with malevolence. Father Thierry carried a lantern that did little to pierce the gloom, but its light revealed the scene of the last murder, a clearing slick with gore, too much to belong to a single man. Claw marks marred the trunks of nearby trees, impossibly high. Wolves don't do this, I said. Father Thierry muttered a prayer. Not wolves, monsieur. The wolf. What do you mean? I turned to him sharply. He hesitated, his face ghostly in the lantern glow. The first to die, they were cursed, monsieur. This is not the work of beasts alone. The loup-garou is something born of sin, a man turned monster. My breath misted in the frigid air. You're speaking of a werewolf. He nodded, eyes darting to the forest. And I fear it will return tonight. The forest of Bois Noirs was no place for men after dark. The trees loomed like the bars of a forgotten cage, their branches rattling as if in anticipation. Father Thierry's lantern flickered weakly as we stood at the edge of the clearing, where the remains of the 13th victim had been discovered. Who was the last to die? I asked, my breath misting as the cold thickened. Etienne Courbet, Father Thierry whispered. The village huntsman. He was the one who first spoke of the creature, 3 weeks ago. It was he who saw it, truly saw it, beneath the red moon. And what did he say? Thierry swallowed hard. That it walked like a man, but its eyes glowed like fire. He said he shot at it, but the bullets did nothing. It laughed, Monsieur Graves. A chill settled in my bones, not from the wind. Laughed. I crouched low, inspecting the claw marks on the tree trunks. They were too deep, the bark split as though with an axe. I traced one mark with my gloved finger. These claws are not animal. What do you mean? Thierry's voice trembled. They're too deliberate. A wolf would claw to kill, to dig or mark territory. These, I paused, feeling the weight of what I was about to say. These look like symbols. Deliberate, ancient. Father Thierry took a step back, clutching the rosary around his neck. Witchcraft. Perhaps, I replied, rising. Or something older than witches. In my years of hunting the inexplicable, I had encountered many stories of the loup-garou. French folklore painted the creature as a man-turned-wolf through dark curses or foul deals with the devil himself. Sometimes, the change was punishment for grievous sins, an eternal torment for those who crossed mortal and moral lines. But what lay before me was no fairy tale. Something more than superstition had stained this village with blood. A noise came from the trees, a rustling, too heavy for wind. Thierry stiffened beside me, his hand tightening around the lantern. "Monsieur Graves," he whispered. "I hear it." I pulled my revolver, its silver bullets loaded with grim purpose. The dark was alive around us, pressing closer. Then the howl came. Low at first, but rising into a pitch that shattered the silence and curdled the blood. It was neither animal nor human, something between a scream and a laugh. Father Thierry staggered back. "God preserve us." "Run," I ordered, my voice hard. "Back to the village. Now." The priest obeyed, his robes whipping as he turned. I stood my ground, the revolver raised as the trees groaned and snapped in front of me. Whatever hunted Bois Noirs was coming for me. And I was ready to meet it. The forest fell deathly silent, as though the world itself held its breath. I remained still, revolver aimed toward the blackness between the trees. I could feel it, an unseen weight pressing down on the clearing. Watching. Waiting. "Show yourself," I muttered under my breath, my grip steady. Then I saw them. Eyes. Two glowing embers staring at me from the dark, too high off the ground to belong to any wolf. They burned with a malevolent intelligence, no animal's gaze could hold such hatred. I didn't hesitate. I fired. The gunshot tore through the stillness, echoing through the woods. The eyes vanished, but something moved, a shadow shifting between the trees with impossible speed. I fired again, the silver bullet striking wood with a dull thud. A low growl rumbled from somewhere to my left, deep and guttural. I turned sharply, scanning the shadows, my pulse pounding in my ears. "You're not clever enough to hide," I said aloud, hoping to provoke whatever it was. "You'll face me, beast, or I'll drag you into the light myself." A soft sound replied, mocking, almost like a chuckle. It was playing with me. I backed toward the path leading to the village, never taking my eyes off the darkness. Another low growl rumbled behind me. I turned just in time to see a massive shape lunge from the shadows. It wasn't a wolf. It wasn't even close to a wolf. The creature landed on all fours, its limbs unnaturally long and sinewy, the claws tipped like knives. Its fur was matted black, thick with gore and shadow, and its head. God, its head was monstrous, a twisted, half-human face stretched into a wolf-like snarl, with teeth far too large for its maw. The eyes glowed as they had before, red as coals, brimming with malevolent glee. It smiled at me, its lips peeling back over jagged fangs. "Good God," I murmured, and fired twice. The bullet struck. The beast howled, a sound of fury more than pain, and leapt back into the forest, disappearing as swiftly as it had emerged. I could hear it moving, circling me, testing me. But it was injured now. Silver had wounded it. "You're not invincible, are you?" I called into the trees, forcing a grim smile. "You bleed. That means you can die." The only answer was the fading sound of its movement, retreating into the black. It would not face me again tonight. I turned and hurried back toward Bois Noirs, where the lights of the village glimmered faintly through the trees. My mind raced. The beast I'd encountered was no mere loup-garou from legend, this was something fouler, something ancient. And yet, it bled. By the time I returned to Bois Noirs, the village was in chaos. Father Thierry stood in the churchyard, attempting to calm the gathered villagers as they shouted over one another, their fear spreading like wildfire. They heard the howls. Thierry called to me as I approached. Something moved through the fields. A shadow. It's real, I said grimly, holstering my revolver. And it can be wounded. Silver hurts it. An old man pushed through the crowd, his face pale and gaunt. Then it is a loup-garou, he said. A beast born of sin. No, I replied, meeting his frantic gaze. It's worse. The villagers fell silent, their faces expectant and horrified. It's clever, I continued. It knows how to hide, how to hunt. But it bled, and that gives us a chance. Against what? Someone shouted. A monster? A demon? Both, I admitted. Whatever hunts you, it is no ordinary curse. But we will fight it. How? Thierry asked. What can we do? Silver weapons, fire, and wards, I said firmly. We gather what we can. Tonight, we make this village a fortress. The villagers murmured nervously, but Thierry nodded, stepping forward. You heard him. Go to your homes. Melt down whatever silver you have, jewelry, cutlery, anything. And pray, I added darkly. Pray the beast does not come before we are ready. As the crowd dispersed, I stood with Father Thierry in the churchyard, staring toward the forest. The moon was rising, thin and pale, but no less ominous. Do you believe we stand a chance? Thierry asked quietly. We must. I pulled a silver bullet from my pocket, its surface glinting coldly in the moonlight. I've killed monsters before, Father. I looked back to the black expanse of the Bois Noirs. But this one's different. It's waiting for something. And in the pit of my stomach, I knew the worst was yet to come. That night, Bois Noirs huddled under lock and key. Doors were bolted, windows reinforced with heavy wooden boards, and whispers of old prayers hung in the chilled air. I stood at the village's center with Father Thierry, my silver-loaded revolver strapped to my chest and a lantern dimmed to preserve the shadows. The moon rose slowly, a pale, sickly orb at first, but as the hours passed, it bled. A crimson glow spilled across the village like a wound in the heavens, and with it came the first echoes from the forest. Howls. They were distant at first, faint enough to pass as mere wolves, but something in the sound stripped away that lie. There was a resonance in those cries, a hunger that sank into the marrow. It started, Thierry murmured beside me. He was armed with a silver-tipped spear I'd fashioned earlier that evening, and though his hands shook, he held it tight. I nodded, my eyes fixed on the black silhouette of the forest. Where are the watchmen? Spread across the village, he replied, as you ordered. I scanned the rooftops and distant tree-leans where a handful of men stood guard, lanterns extinguished so as not to betray their positions. They clutched pitchforks, axes, and, where fortune had provided, silver knives or bullets. It would not be enough, but it was something. For a time, there was silence. And then the screams began. A gunshot shattered the stillness, followed by a cry that ended far too quickly. I spun toward the eastern fields, where a lantern suddenly flared. Shadows danced wildly, and then, nothing. Come on. I shouted to Thierry, and we sprinted toward the breach. The wind howled around us as we ran through the open square. The cries of the villagers, muffled by walls and shutters, rose in chorus as fear spread like contagion. When we reached the eastern edge of the village, we found the body. It was Lucien, one of the younger men I'd tasked with watching the fields. He lay sprawled in the frost-covered dirt, his throat torn open. Blood soaked into the ground in a widening pool, steam still rising from the fresh wound. But it wasn't the corpse that stopped me cold. It was the marks. Around Lucien's body were clawed symbols, jagged spirals and interlocking crescents etched deep into the earth. They pulsed faintly under the glow of the blood moon, a sickly light seeping into the soil. What is this? Thierry gasped, stepping back. Ritual magic, I replied grimly. The beast isn't just hunting. It's feeding. Thierry turned to me, his face pale in the crimson light. Feeding on what? The village, I said softly. Its fear. Its blood. Its souls. A branch snapped in the distance. We turned sharply, and there, emerging from the tree lean, was the beast. It was worse now, larger, its twisted form somehow more complete beneath the blood moon. Its limbs were longer, unnaturally sinewy, and its black fur seemed to writhe like living shadows. Its face, stretched and unnatural, grinned at us, a mockery of humanity frozen in a snarl. And its eyes. Those cursed, burning eyes held me in place, red as fresh embers. Back! I shouted, raising the revolver and firing. The silver bullet struck true, punching into the beast's shoulder. It staggered but did not fall. Instead, it laughed. The sound, deep, guttural, and somehow human, froze the breath in my lungs. Thierry clutched his spear, his voice a hoarse whisper. It's mocking us. Yes, I muttered. And it's not finished. The beast lowered its head and let out a howl that split the night in two. The sound rattled windows and shook doors in their frames. From the village behind us, I heard another scream, and then another. It's not alone, I realized, my voice tight. The howl wasn't a declaration. It was a summons. We ran. There was no other choice. I heard the howls multiplying behind us, echoing through the woods and fields. The beast was calling others, shadows of itself, half-formed and hungry. They're inside. Thierry shouted as we reached the square. I looked up to see a dark figure scaling the rooftops, claws digging into stone as it moved with inhuman speed. Another crashed through a window in the distance, splinters flying into the cold air. The village was under siege. Get the people to the church. I ordered Thierry, shoving him toward the building at the village center. The doors are thick. It's the safest place. What about you? I turned back toward the eastern field, where the largest beast still lingered at the tree lean, watching me with those blazing eyes. I'll draw it away. Thierry hesitated, but the screams from the houses around us made up his mind. God be with you, Monsieur Graves, he said, and then he was gone. I pulled the remaining silver bullets from my pocket, 3 left. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. The creature's eyes tracked me as I stepped toward the edge of the village. You want me? I called into the darkness. Then come and take me. It tilted its head, its grin widening, and for a moment, I felt like I was staring into the eyes of the devil himself. Then it charged. It came at me like a force of nature, limbs moving too quickly for something so large. I fired once, twice, the first bullet missed, but the second struck its chest, sending it stumbling into a fence post with a snarl. But it didn't stop. I ran, leading it through the narrow streets of Bois Noirs, past shuttered houses and smoldering lanterns. I needed to buy time for Thierry to gather the villagers, time to find a weakness in this nightmare. The creature pursued me relentlessly, its claws scraping against the cobblestones, its breath hot on my neck. I turned sharply at a crossroads, ducking into an alley and reloading my revolver. For a moment, there was silence. Then I heard it. Breathing. It was close, too close. I spun just in time to see the beast leap from the shadows above, its claws outstretched. I threw myself to the ground as it crashed into the wall beside me, stone shattering beneath its weight. I fired point blank into its ribs. The silver bullet burned as it struck, smoke rising from the wound, and the creature roared in agony. It swiped at me blindly, and I barely managed to roll clear before its claws tore into the ground where I'd lain. The monster staggered back, blood oozing black and thick from the wound. For the first time, its grin faltered. You feel that? I growled, rising to my feet. That's silver. It doesn't like you, does it? The beast snarled, its ember eyes narrowing. Then, to my horror, it tilted its head back and howled again. The sound carried through the village like a death knell, and from every direction, I heard the answering calls of its pack. The creature turned back to me, that awful grin returning. It wasn't running. It wasn't afraid. It was stalling. The hunt was far from over. The church stood at the heart of Bois Noirs like a fortress of stone and stained glass. I sprinted toward it as the echoes of the beast's howl reverberated through the village, shaking the very air. From all corners came the answering cries of its kin, high-pitched and shrieking, monstrous voices filled with malice and hunger. As I approached the heavy wooden doors of the church, Father Thierry threw them open, his face pale as the moon above. Behind him, the frightened villagers huddled together, clutching whatever meager weapons they could find, silver cutlery fashioned into makeshift knives, fire pokers, and salt poured into lines across the stone floor. "Graves!" Thierry called. "Hurry!" I bolted inside, turning to slam the doors shut behind me. The moment they closed, the priest and I dragged a heavy oak pew against them, barricading the entrance. The villagers stared, wide-eyed, their faces drawn and ghostly in the glow of flickering candlelight. "Is it out there?" someone whispered. I glanced at Thierry, who held his rosary so tightly his knuckles had turned white. "Yes," I said. "And it's not alone." A woman sobbed softly in the back of the nave. An old man murmured a prayer under his breath, his voice trembling. Around us, the air grew colder, as though the shadows themselves were breathing. "Listen to me," I barked, my voice cutting through their fear. "We must hold this ground. Stay together. Do not let them draw you outside. They're just animals, aren't they?" the young man said, his voice unsteady. "Wolves." I shook my head grimly. "No. This is no wolf pack. This is something else." At that moment, the first blow struck the church doors. A sound like thunder echoed through the hall, rattling the stained glass windows. The villagers screamed. "Stay calm," I ordered, drawing my revolver and checking the chamber. 2 silver bullets remained. 2. It wasn't enough. A second blow struck, splintering the wood. From outside came growls, low, guttural, and hungry. Something massive scraped its claws down the door, carving deep grooves into the ancient wood. "Father." I turned to Thierry. "Do you still have holy water?" "Yes," he gasped, gesturing to a silver basin near the altar. "Good," I said. "Bless it again. Do you think it will help?" "It can't hurt," I replied grimly. The pounding on the doors grew louder, more frantic. Outside, I could hear the beasts circling the church, their claws clattering against the stone walls as they searched for a way in. Shadows flickered through the stained glass, distorting into shapes that defied reason, twisted limbs, glowing eyes, and teeth like knives. "They're everywhere," someone whispered. "Hold the line," I said. "We keep them out." I turned to a group of men, farmers and shopkeepers armed with axes, pitchforks, and desperation. "If the doors fail, we fight. Salt the floor and aim for the head. Fire and silver can kill them. Nothing else. Do you understand?" They nodded, though their hands trembled. Thierry stood at the altar, his voice rising in prayer as he blessed the basin of holy water. Candle flames flickered violently as though pushed by an unseen wind, and a cold, unnatural chill settled over the church. Then the glass shattered. A shriek like 1,000 knives pierced the air as a beast crashed through a stained glass window high above, landing on the stone floor in a rain of jagged shards. The creature rose, towering and inhuman, its fur matted with black blood, its limbs far too long for its hunched frame. The villagers screamed and stumbled back. "Here!" I shouted, firing my revolver. The silver bullet struck the creature in the chest, and it howled, a sound that shook the rafters. Smoke hissed from the wound, and the beast staggered. But it didn't fall. With terrifying speed, it lunged toward a young man holding an axe, knocking him to the ground with a single swipe. Blood sprayed across the stone floor. "No!" Thierry cried. "Get back!" I yelled, grabbing a burning torch from the wall and hurling it at the creature. The flames licked its fur, and it screeched, stumbling away from the boy's body. Fire, it seemed, still had power over it. "Use the torches!" I shouted to the others. "Drive it back!" A second beast leapt through the broken window, landing with a crash near the pews. The villagers scrambled, holding their torches high and forming a rough circle near the altar. The two creatures circled us now, their ember eyes glowing in the dark. They moved with a horrifying intelligence, their grins mocking us as they tested the edges of the firelight. "Stay together!" I ordered, raising the last of my silver bullets. The beasts lunged. Chaos erupted as the creatures attacked. The first beast, its wound still smoking from the silver, struck at the men near the pews. Torches flashed, and the acrid smell of burning fur filled the air as flames licked its limbs. It howled in pain, but its strength was monstrous. It knocked two men aside like rag dolls, sending them crashing into the pews. The second beast came for me. It moved faster than I could fire, closing the distance in 2 bounds. I raised my revolver and fired. The silver bullet struck its skull, and the creature roared as smoke and blood exploded from the wound. It staggered, its claws scraping at its head, before collapsing to the ground with a sickening thud. "One down," I muttered, turning to face the first. It was tearing through the villagers, its claws leaving ribbons of red across the stone. A man swung his torch at it, but the beast swatted him aside, sending the flames sputtering out on the cold floor. "Keep the fire burning!" I shouted. "Thierry, now!" The priest, still trembling, grabbed the silver basin of holy water and flung it at the creature. The water hissed and steamed where it struck, burning the beast's fur as though it were acid. The creature shrieked, stumbling back as smoke billowed from its body. "This way!" I grabbed a torch and swung it at the beast, forcing it toward the altar. It snarled, its ember eyes flickering with rage as it backed away. "Graves!" Thierry called. I turned just in time to see the creature crouch, ready to lunge. It wasn't running, it was fighting to the death. "Come on then," I muttered, raising the torch. It leapt. I met it with fire. The creature crashed into me, knocking the breath from my lungs. Its claws tore at my coat, shredding fabric and drawing blood. But I didn't let go of the torch. I drove it into the beast's chest, forcing the flames deeper, until the smell of burning flesh choked the air. The creature screamed, a sound so raw and unnatural that it shook the walls. It thrashed, its claws scraping the stone floor as flames consumed it. Black smoke billowed from its body, rising toward the rafters like a dark spirit torn free. Finally, it fell. The beast twitched once, then lay still, its body smoldering. Silence fell over the church, broken only by the ragged breathing of those who remained. I pushed myself to my feet, wincing as pain lanced through my shoulder where the beast had struck me. Thierry was beside me, clutching his rosary as tears streamed down his face. "Is it over?" he whispered. I looked down at the smoldering corpse, its ember eyes finally dark. "For now," I said. But this wasn't all of them. The villagers stared at the bodies, their faces pale and hollow. Blood stained the stone, mingling with ash and smoke. The church had held, for now. Outside, the howls had ceased. But the blood moon still hung in the sky, watching. Waiting. The church smelled of death and smoke. Bodies, both human and beast, littered the stone floor, their blood mingling with the remnants of holy water and ash. The villagers stood in stunned silence, their faces pale and hollow. For many, the night had taken everything. Father Thierry knelt beside the smoldering corpse of the creature, his shaking hands still clutching his rosary. What are they, Graves?" he whispered. I stood over the beast's remains, my revolver hanging heavy in my hand. The creature's fur still smoldered, its flesh burned and blackened. Its mouth, twisted into a rictus grin even in death, revealed fangs as long as a man's fingers. "There's something ancient," I said finally. "This isn't just a loup-garou, not the kind of beast your legends speak of. No lone curse could create something like this." I kicked a piece of the creature's cracked skull. "This is deliberate. Created. Called." Thierry looked up sharply. "Called. Summoned, father. Someone, or something, brought these things here." The villagers murmured, a ripple of fear spreading through the crowd. A young woman clutching a child to her chest stepped forward, her voice thin and trembling. "Are you saying this is our fault?" "No," I replied, scanning the frightened faces. "But curses are never random. They need an anchor, a reason to take root." Father Thierry rose slowly, his eyes wide with dawning horror. "The forest." "What?" I turned to him. He pointed toward the shattered stained glass window, through which the blood moon still hung in the sky, casting a sickly glow over Bois Noirs. "The forest of Bois Noirs. It has always been cursed, Monsieur Graves. The elders spoke of it when I was a boy. Stories of witches who lived in the woods, men who disappeared under the blood moon, and shadows that moved like living things." "Stories," I said, narrowing my eyes. "What else did the elders say, father?" Thierry hesitated. "There's a place deep within the woods, an old shrine. No one goes there now, but it's said to be a source of the curse." A cold knot formed in my stomach. I had seen this before, shrines forgotten by time, their protections corrupted by dark hands. "If the shrine is still active, it could explain this," I said, gesturing to the beast's corpse. "The blood moon, the killings, the creatures, they all lead back to it." "You think the shrine is the key?" Thierry asked. "I don't think. I know." I holstered my revolver, feeling the weight of my remaining bullets, one silver round left. "Whatever's happening here began with that shrine. If we don't end it, the beasts will come again." The villagers did not want me to leave. "You'll die out there," an old man warned me as he clutched a silver-tipped pitchfork. "The forest is death after dark." "Perhaps," I replied, fastening my coat and checking my torch. "But staying here is a slow death. If I can destroy the source of this curse, it ends." Father Thierry insisted on coming with me. He was no warrior, but his knowledge of the forest stories would prove valuable. I couldn't afford to turn him away. Together, we stepped out into the moonlit square, where the village lay silent under the red light. "Stay inside," I told the gathered villagers. "Keep the church locked. No matter what you hear, don't open the doors." Their pale faces watched us as we disappeared into the dark, lantern light fading behind us. The forest of Bois Noirs seemed alive beneath the blood moon. The trees creaked and groaned, their branches twisting like skeletal hands. The ground squelched underfoot, damp with frost and something fouler, blood, perhaps, or the residue of old magic. Thierry carried the silver basin of holy water, his knuckles white as he gripped it. "How far is the shrine?" I asked, sweeping the area ahead of us with the torch. The flame sputtered as if protesting the very air. "An hour's walk, maybe more," Thierry replied. "If the stories are true, it's near the heart of the woods. A stone altar surrounded by trees so old they blot out the moon. Then we'll find it." I kept my revolver in hand, though I knew one silver bullet wouldn't be enough if the beasts returned. As we moved deeper into the woods, I felt it, the air thickening, pressing down on me like a weight. It was the unmistakable presence of something dark and watching. "Do you feel that?" Thierry whispered. "Yes," I said, my voice low. "We're not alone." Ahead of us, the path narrowed. The trees pressed closer together, their trunks etched with strange symbols, claw marks and spirals like those I'd seen in the village. My torchlight flickered across them, casting distorted shadows that seemed to move when I wasn't looking. "They've been here," I muttered. "The beasts. They mark their territory." Thierry stopped suddenly, his breath catching in his throat. "Monsieur Graves." I followed his gaze. A shape hung from the low branches of an oak, a body. A man, his limbs twisted unnaturally, his throat torn wide open. Blood still dripped from his boots, pooling on the frozen earth below. His face had been stretched into a mask of terror. Thierry made the sign of the cross. "Is that Etienne?" "No," I said, stepping closer. The corpse was fresher. "This happened tonight." "Then the beasts are ahead of us," Thierry whispered, dread filling his voice. "They're guarding the shrine," I replied. "And they know we're coming." It took us longer than an hour to find the shrine. The forest grew denser, and the air colder, until we stumbled upon a clearing that seemed carved out of the earth itself. The shrine stood in its center, a massive stone altar, black with age and covered in clawed symbols that glowed faintly under the crimson moon. Around it, the trees twisted unnaturally, their bark peeling back like rotted flesh. Bones littered the ground, animal and human alike, all gnawed clean. "This is it," Thierry whispered, his voice barely audible. "Yes," I said, stepping forward. "And it reeks of death." A sound stopped me cold, a low growl, vibrating through the clearing. From the shadows of the trees, shapes began to emerge. The beasts were waiting. There were 3 of them, smaller than the one I'd faced earlier, but no less monstrous. They circled us, their ember eyes glowing and teeth bared. They didn't attack. Not yet. They were waiting for something. Or someone. Then I saw it. A figure stood behind the altar, shrouded in black robes, its face hidden beneath a hood. It held a dagger in one hand, its blade stained with blood. Its other hand rested on the stone, fingers splayed across the glowing symbols. "Who are you?" I demanded, raising my revolver. The figure didn't answer. Instead, it began to chant, a low, guttural voice that resonated through the clearing, rattling my bones. The symbols on the shrine flared brighter, and the beasts growled, their muscles coiling as if ready to strike. Thierry clutched my arm. "Graves, the shrine, he's feeding it." The robed figure's chant rose to a fever pitch. The earth trembled, and the blood pooled around the altar began to boil. "Stop him!" Thierry shouted. I didn't hesitate. I fired my last silver bullet. The shot struck true, slamming into the figure's chest. The chanting stopped. For a moment, there was silence. And then the figure began to laugh. A terrible, hollow sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The hood fell back, and I saw its face. It was Etienne Courbet. Or what was left of him. His skin was gray and rotting, his eyes burned with red light, and his mouth, too wide, too filled with teeth, curled into a smile. "You're too late, Graves," he rasped. Behind him, the beasts howled, and the shrine flared to life. The blood moon burned brighter. And the forest answered. The clearing roared with noise. The beasts circled like wolves, their ember eyes fixed on me, their growls vibrating through the ground. At the altar, Etienne, or what was left of him, stood grinning, the wound from my silver bullet smoking but not stopping him. "You think silver will save you?" he rasped, his voice layered with something darker, something not human. "This place was never yours to reclaim, Graves. It belongs to us." I ignored his words, my mind racing. The shrine, it was the heart of the curse. Everything, Etienne, the beasts, the blood moon, was tethered to it. "Father Thierry!" I shouted, backing toward the priest, who still clutched the silver basin of holy water. We need to destroy the shrine. Thierry stared at the glowing symbols on the stone, his face pale as death. How? Fire. I snarled, tossing him my torch. Burn it all. Now. Etienne's laugh curdled the air. You cannot destroy what was written into the bones of this land. He raised his arms, and the beasts lunged. I fired my revolver, emptying it into the first creature. It staggered but kept coming, jaws snapping as I sidestepped its charge and struck it with the butt of my gun. Thierry stumbled back, dropping the torch near the base of the shrine. It sputtered but caught, flames licking at the blackened stone. Keep it burning. I shouted. The other two beasts attacked. One crashed into me, claws ripping across my chest. I screamed, the pain blinding, but I drove my knife, iron and silver-laced, into its neck. The beast howled, black blood pouring from the wound, and collapsed. The third beast lunged at Thierry. Father, move. I roared. Thierry turned just in time, flinging the basin of holy water into the creature's face. It screeched as the water hissed and burned through its fur, steam rising as though from molten metal. It stumbled back, thrashing blindly, and Thierry fell to his knees, praying frantically. The fire at the altar grew, but not fast enough. Etienne shrieked, his voice inhuman. You think fire will cleanse this place? This land hungers. It always will. You're wrong, I growled, pushing to my feet, pain ripping through my side. Blood streamed down my coat, but I ignored it. Curses don't linger without someone to feed them. I turned and hurled my knife, silver and iron, straight at Etienne's heart. The blade struck home, sinking deep into his chest. Etienne's laughter turned into a scream as the light in his eyes faltered. His form began to wither, black smoke pouring from his mouth as he staggered back against the altar. The glowing symbols dimmed, flickering like dying embers. No, Etienne hissed, his voice breaking. You can't. The fire surged. The shrine erupted in flames, the black stone cracking as if in agony. The ground trembled, and the beasts let out shrieking cries as they collapsed one by one, their bodies dissolving into ash. Etienne fell to his knees, the smoke from his withering form twisting up into the blood-red sky like a dying shadow. Graves! Thierry cried as the ground split apart beneath the altar, fire and smoke spewing forth. Get back! I shouted, grabbing him by the arm and dragging him away from the clearing. The forest groaned as if alive, branches snapping and earth heaving. The altar shattered with a sound like thunder, flames consuming everything in their path. We stumbled clear just as the clearing exploded, a torrent of fire and black smoke billowing into the sky. The blood moon above us seemed to waver, its crimson glow flickering. The wind shrieked through the trees, carrying away the echoes of the beast's howls until silence. The fire died, and the forest stilled. The blood moon faded, its red light draining into the horizon until the sky was pale and empty. The curse was broken. I sat slumped against a tree, blood soaking my coat, my breath ragged. Father Thierry knelt beside me, his hands still trembling but his eyes alight with something close to relief. It's over, he whispered. For now, I replied, my voice hoarse. The land will heal, in time. He glanced back at the clearing, now little more than scorched earth and ash. What about the beasts? Will they return? Not without the shrine, I said. And not without someone foolish enough to summon them again. I paused, my eyes narrowing. But this wasn't random, Father. Someone, maybe Etienne himself, brought this on the village. This kind of darkness doesn't rise on its own. Thierry nodded slowly, the weight of it settling in his bones. Then let us hope no one seeks it out again. By dawn, the village began to stir. The survivors emerged from the church, blinking into the weak morning light, their faces lined with grief and exhaustion. The forest was silent now, no more howls, no more shadows. I stood at the edge of the woods, bandaged and weary, watching as the villagers began to clean what remained of their shattered lives. Thierry stood beside me, his face solemn. "They'll rebuild," he said softly. "They always do," I replied. "But the scars will remain." I looked back toward the woods, where smoke still lingered above the clearing. The shrine was gone, but I knew its memory would haunt the village for generations. Bois Noirs would never forget the blood moon, or the beasts that had hunted them. As I turned to leave, Thierry spoke again. "Where will you go now, Graves?" "Wherever I'm needed," I said, fastening my coat against the cold. "There's always another shadow lurking somewhere. And what if the shadows find you first?" I offered him a faint, grim smile. "They always do, father." With that, I walked away, leaving Bois Noirs behind. But as I stepped onto the road, I couldn't shake the feeling that something still watched from the depths of the forest, a presence lingering at the edges of sight, waiting for its chance to rise again. Perhaps it was just the wind. Or perhaps the land itself was not yet done with me. The beasts are gone. The shrine is ash. But curses are never so easily buried, are they? Tell me, friend, have you heard the wind howl lately?